We're going to pick up here Deuteronomy chapter 21, and we're just going to talk very briefly here, verses 10 to 14. It gives some regulations on female captives when they go to war. They take non-Canaanite wives. She has to adjust, adapt to the ways of the Israelites. If not happy with her, then you have to let her go free. In verses 15 to 17, it talks about inheritance rights. And one of the things that it kind of reveals or highlights there is problems that arise in polygamy. That here this man has two wives. He has a favorite wife and a less favorite wife. And if the less favored one has the oldest son, he may tend to overlook him for the favored wife's son as far as inheritance goes. And he says you can't do that. You have to abide by the fact that he is the firstborn and respect that, and he gets the double portion. All right, let's jump in verses 18 to 21 here. Deuteronomy 21, 18 to 21. Who will read that for us?
If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of his city, at the gateway of his hometown. Then shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of this city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it and fear.
Okay. So question 5 may be obvious, but how is a rebellious son to be dealt with? Okay. All right. What did they do before he would be put to death? Yeah, they need to correct him, rebuke him, chasten him. The parents have been working on this son to try to get him to change his ways. But he is stubborn. He's resistant to that. He remains in his sin. And it talks about, in particular, he's a glutton and a drunkard. In other words, he's just living a hedonistic lifestyle. He's just following his passions, his base desires, whatever it is that he wants, and he won't correct his ways. So his parents take him to the elders of the city. They lay the case out before them. He's found guilty of that. Yeah, this is the way that he is. Stone him. Why? Verse 21.
Well, obvious reason, like we spoke earlier last week, is it just spreads. Evil spreads. Rebellious spirit will spread.
Right.
Falsehood spread. All bad things spread rapidly.
Yeah, they can infect others. Any other thoughts there, Philip?
Israel pure, and by making an example of one rebellious son, it'll set an example for others. Hey, you don't want to do this because this person will do this. This is what happens.
Right. And Ron?
Yes, I was going to say what Phil mentioned, that in that regard, capital punishment should serve as a deterrent. And it's a lesson for us to learn today.
Right. Yeah. It should serve as a deterrent. When these things were carried out in the Bible, they were carried out in rapid order. It wasn't like, they let 20 years pass while the person waits on this appeal and that appeal. No, he's guilty. They pretty much dragged him out right then, and he's done. So yeah, as a great deterrent and to extinguish that evil, so it's not there and it sends a message to everybody else. So I ask you to search in Proverbs for passages that deal with discipline of children. Note some and be prepared to discuss. What do you all have? Proverbs. How about Proverbs 13:24? Let's look at that one. Proverbs 13:24. Who will read that one for us? Philip.
He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly.
Okay, so what's it saying?
It's not saying he who spares the rod spoils his child. I usually know that difference. That's become the nickname phrase, spare the rod, spoil the son, but it says hate, not spoil. There's a difference distinguishing there.
And what's the rod?
It's correction or discipline.
Yeah, correction or discipline. Anybody, maybe I shouldn't ask you to confess this, but I was going to ask, anybody ever used a rod on your son? Hey, my grandfather used to believe in switches, right? Go out on the tree, you grab a switch, and that's what he would come after you with. My mom used a fly swatter. My dad used a belt. We used a wooden spoon and a belt. Okay, and so people on the internet, yes, we wore our children out because of what it says right here.
My parents required me to go cut the switch.
Right, and you better get a good one,
Yes.
because if you didn't, it was going to be even more painful. Right. Yeah, so there is an instrument, a tool being used to apply physical correction to the child, to inflict pain upon them. Now, what is this not saying or endorsing or an excuse for? Abuse, right? There is a difference between lighting up their britches, their little bottoms, getting them to feel some sting and put a little bit of red in there, and bruising, hurting, breaking, bringing blood. There's a difference in those things. And I think most people understand that, most people see it, but the critics of corporal punishment will try to say it's all the same, it's all violence, but it's not violence. What does it say it is here? Do what? Love. This is love. Because you're trying to get them to correct their behavior. Lack of discipline is hate. Literally says you hate your child, you're not disciplining them.
I think if the chastening or rods of correction that the shepherd would use when they herd their sheep, they weren't abusing those sheep. They just got those sheep to do what they wanted them to do.
Right. For what purpose? For what reason?
For the good of the herd, for the good of the family, for their wealth, their livelihood.
Yeah, it was for the good of the sheep. Like, you're headed the wrong way. No, you need to come back this way. Maybe there's danger over there. Maybe there's a precipice that they would fall off of. Or whatever it would be, it's for the benefit of the sheep is why that would be done. And this for the benefit of the child for this. Anybody have a proverb, another proverb?
Proverbs 19, and I think it's verse 18 says, discipline your son while there's hope, and do not set your heart to put him to death. So the warning is, discipline your son while there's time, so you don't have to put him to death. That's a preventive measure.
Exactly right. While there's hope, while you can, because there comes a time when you cannot discipline your children. It will reach that point at some stage where you are not going to be able to do it, either because of their physical size and, a young man will take you on, or he'll be able to get away. He's moved away. She's moved away. And there's no opportunity now to discipline them, to correct them, to help to train them. Proverbs 22:15. Did you have something, Nancy? Go ahead.
22:6.
22:6. What do we have there?
That's talking about the positive discipline, the training, train them up. It doesn't negate any physical corporal punishment, but it's teaching them the right way first. And expecting them and making sure that they do those things you're training them to do. Discipline is not all corrective, it's instructive.
Exactly. There is the positive training, teaching, instruction, telling them about here's the right behavior, here's the benefits of the right behavior, rewarding them for right behavior, encouraging them in that. And then when they deviate from that, there comes a time, depending on if they're just being stubborn, rebellious, sarcastic, being ugly, maybe toward a parent, toward others, that you may need to bring in that corporal punishment. But yes, the training is a vital part of the discipline. John, do you have something else?
Proverbs 29 has several things in there. One that sticks out in my mind is 29:17, where it says, "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give your heart, or he will give delight to your heart." And that's after he says, "Rod and reproof gives wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother." So there's a couple in there.
Okay.
The results of it is good.
Yeah, there's wisdom in that, and rest and delight it brings to you, because the child has learned, the child has grown, the child has matured, and the child has taken on board those things you've taught him or her, and they're living it out because they have learned that's the way to live, and that's a delight, that's a blessing in their life. Any other thoughts there?
I got Proverbs 23, verse 13.
Mm-hmm.
Do not hold back discipline from a child. Although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. Even though he may scream at the top of his lungs and make you think he's going to die. If you shall strike him with the rod, you're going to rescue his soul from sin. So, kids very much make you think that the worst thing ever, that discipline. But you still have a job that you have to do, and that is to save their soul from sin.
Right. Exactly right. They do make you, and I have to admit, I was one of those children, like, I was screaming bloody murder. But, it was good. I would have to say my parents were probably light on discipline. Now as an adult, as a child, if you had asked me, I'd have been like, they're just so hard. But as an adult, probably should have gotten some more. It probably would have helped out. When you look back through the generations in this country, and okay, I don't know how y'all view it now, but sometimes I just wonder what in the world is wrong with those parents. That child needs to be snatched up and worn out. Well, I think that reflects in what's happening in our country. Now, there's a lot of different things going on, but one of them is the unruliness of children. They're not getting disciplined like they need discipline. You go back in time, you did not have young people behaving disrespectful, rude, discourteous, and all these other things that are happening. They weren't out rioting and pillaging and, wreaking havoc all over the place. They were respectful of older people. Even if they were mischievous, they were still respectful when there were older people around. And those were children, the generation in the, let's say the early 1900s coming into the World War II generation, they got very stern discipline at home. Need it?
I think it's up to the burden of the home to do that. First thing to get once is that to start. You also have parents today that don't parent. The TV is the babysitter.
Right.
Video games are the babysitter. The worldly things are not permission, slap home medicine. This is not bothering me.
Give them a pill. Whereas if you gave them the belt, they're going to scream like crazy, but they'll learn that lesson. Go ahead.
They would teach you deficit. I'm not knocking it because it is something we struggle with. But I remember my daddy always told us, "I'll get your attention."
Well, yeah. As far as that goes, I I can't speak to all kinds of medical issues, but I know that if I grew up now, they would heavily medicate me because I was not one of those kids that sat there and just, was quiet. I was high energy and very much taxing on my mother. But be that as it may, this would fix a lot of things. And you look in communities, particular certain segments of our culture where there are no homes. There's a lot of unwed mothers. Right there is a problem among young people. They are unruly.
Yeah, I was going to say, whenever especially with the experience we've had with foster children, whenever we're out in public and we see some of those meltdowns, we try to reserve that judgment on that person there because I don't know that situation. Because so many kids are in the foster care program now. But it shows where we are as a society. The child has been taken out of the home. Hasn't received the discipline necessary to be able to go to the store or whatever. And also, whenever you see a child doing that, especially whenever it's a parent, you're not dealing with the problem. That's where we are in society now. It's a sad state of affairs.
Well, it's in our culture has gotten to the point where if you do discipline your child in public, there could be ramifications for that, which I understand legally sometimes your hands are tied on those things with the foster system, things like that. But other than that, me personally, like, take me to jail. I'm ready for it, because there is a specific formula and commandment in God's Word. You need to bring your children into subjection. And I'll just say from my experience as a parent that the earlier you nail that down, the better it is. If you wait till a child is even 3 or 4 years old, they're already trained. If you nip it right in the bud, they get it. They get it very quickly. And then you don't have to do as much later on. Now that's my experience. I understand if you have a child like I was, it may take a little longer. But why is the Bible so explicit and clear about this disciplining of children?
You need to be the mom and dad.
Okay, that's true. Why? They're going to grow up and do what?
Raise children.
Well, they're going to raise children, that's for sure. Got a lot of hands. Man, this is a good subject. Go ahead.
It actually sets the precedence of them, their beginning of understanding who God is and the place that God should be in their lives for the rest of their lives going forward.
That ultimately is where it's all leading. They need to learn respect for authority in the home, and there are consequences for misbehavior and rebellion. They need to understand that's true in society, that you mess up, you're going to pay for it. Today, though, we have the issue with people hating the police. And I'm not saying all police are good. I don't believe all police officers are good. I believe there's rotten apples. I think there's bad doctors. I think there's bad teachers. I think there's bad preachers. They're out there. But generally speaking, when you look at that, you see the problem of there's no respect taught in the home, then there's no respect on the streets, and there's no respect of God. And that ultimately is what leads to their souls going to hell, and that's what the proverb writer's warning against. Don't skip this step in your life of raising your children, because they're going to end up losing their soul over it. All right. I'm off my soapbox. Anybody else want to jump on it, but not for too long? Go ahead, Chris.
See, this is just one of the many examples. We know God's Word is perfect from beginning to end. And it gives us so many different things to follow. This one example for being able to correct your children is in there time and time again.
But you can see, from my time, back to the late 60s, early 70s, all the way up, there's a difference between basically every 10 or so years goes by, you can see this country shifting. You can see, and it's always, well, I heard my grandparents, well, the younger generation nowadays, well, now I look at the younger generation, and I see what my grandparents saw. But the problem with that is when this country continues to get further and further from God and His Word, and you take away the basics of His Word, and this is what we deal with in this country. Number one, you've taken God out, you've taken discipline out. There is no belief anymore. It's do what you want and get everybody happy. And that's what we have in this country.
Right. You know, you can't reason with a 2-year-old. You can explain, you can start that teaching process, but generally, you know, it's like they don't get the higher logic of why this is the right thing to do. It's just you do it, or if you don't, you know, here's what happens. But as was mentioned a while ago, you know, the breakdown of the home, breakdown of the family, that's what Satan is after, because it does lead to lost souls. That's what's behind all of it. Let's jump back to Deuteronomy chapter 21 now. Deuteronomy 21. And there's a variety of things that he lays out here. Moses is kind of just going one after the other on various issues as he's running through some of these laws. One of them, the last part of chapter 21 there, don't leave a body hanging overnight. The penalty's been paid, the shame has been displayed, put that body away now so you don't defile the land. And that's part of what the issue was when Jesus was on the cross. They wanted to get those bodies off the cross because of this law there. And then verses 1 through 3, he talks about restoring and or caring for lost property. Let's read verse 4. Deuteronomy 22 verse 4, as he's still talking about the property, but a different application of it here.
I have a very quick question.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned it, you know, about hanging him on a cross, so like hanging him in a tree, and be taken off. Did you say that that's why they want to take him off the cross, Jesus off the cross so quickly?
That's part of it. And it talks about the next day was a high day, a Sabbath day. But that it comes into play with the Jews want those bodies down as quick as possible, you know, after they've been put up.
So in this, then, I guess what we've seen here is some foreshadowing of making sure that body was off the cross into the grave, so that 3 days starts or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah, it all plays into it, layers into that. Yep. Very good.
Wasn't no special deal though, that was the cut.
Right. Right. The Romans would leave them there for the buzzards to pick. But the Jews want them down and done. Yeah. All right. Deuteronomy 22:4. 22:4. Who'll get that? Go ahead, Zach.
You shall not see your countryman's donkey or his ox fallen down on the way, and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly help him to raise them up.
Okay. So what's this different than maybe some others, or somebody give me a rewording or a principle in here.
Don't pretend you didn't see it. Turn away, like the Good Samaritan story in the New Testament. You see it, you're responsible for helping. It's the duty of man to man, countryman to countryman, to care for your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a moderate encouragement. Don't pass by Stephen while his car's broke down.
Yeah, don't pass by me when my car's broke down. Yeah, exactly right. Well, and here he's saying, you know, you're in a position to help out here. You need to help out. Don't just ignore it, as Zach was saying there. This is doing active goodwill to your neighbor and not turning a blind eye. Verse 5. Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. Who will read that for us? Go ahead, Paul.
A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God.
So what's it saying?
A man be a man, a woman be a woman.
I can't wear my dress anymore.
Rick, would you edit that out, please? Question number 1 on this lesson, I asked, where is this principle in the New Testament, and can you see its application today?
1 Corinthians 11, I think, is one place to speak to that.
Okay, let's jump to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. This principle is laid out here, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 6, for if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn, but if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. Down in verse 14, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him, but if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. And it's just laying out those same basic principles that a man needs to be a man, a woman needs to be a woman. And I'm not going to get into debate with anybody about what's long hair and what's short hair. Okay? You can get into that debate with yourself. The principle is, you look at someone, you should know that's a man. You look at someone, you should know that's a woman. And not be questioning or guessing. And this isn't like you see them, the other side of this a lot out there, and you don't know, somebody's wearing a hat. Was that a man or a woman? It's not that kind of thing. It's that kind of thing when you're walking in public or in the store and you go, is that a man or a woman? That kind of thing. Or, that person looked like a man, but I'm pretty sure it was a woman because of different things about their voice or their hair or other bodily features that, today more and more you see that. It's like traveling through the airport the other day. It's like, well, I know those are women, but man, they're sure acting like men. You have something, Mike?
Yeah, I was thinking in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, where it gives this list of things that will not inherit the kingdom of God, and in that it mentions effeminate, those who are effeminate. And I guess that's more of an action that he's talking about here rather than a dress, but still kind of the same thing.
Yeah, today, if I'm not mistaken, years ago, and it may still be on TV, I don't know, but they have shows with, quote, drag queens, That's being celebrated in our society, and this is specifically against it. 1 Corinthians 11 is specifically against that kind of behavior. That is unacceptable. It's an abomination in the sight of God, because He made men to be men and women to be women.
Romans 1 touches on that too, to the extreme action of homosexuality, unnatural relations, men to men, women to women. So that principle is blown up, like big capital font kind of application. Romans 1 from the note in Deuteronomy about transvestism. Hair is one of it that we see later in the New Testament in 1 Timothy and in 1 Peter, how women are to typically adorn themselves, which implies that there's typical dress for women and there's typical dress and behavior for men. So there's a few places in the New Testament that help with those things.
Right. And the thing is, for the generations that are coming up, the generations that are, let's say, up through their teen years in our society right now, are being hammered with this idea that gender is a choice, that it's fluid, that, if a little boy wants to be a little girl, that's perfectly fine, and vice versa. And they will dress their children that way. They refer to them, in it gets confusing to me. You know, him is her and her is him and all that stuff. The Bible is solidly against that. And we cannot be approving or excusing of that when opportunities arise. You know, we need to take advantage of it and teach people that's not the order that God has laid down. It's an abomination before Him. Any other thoughts there? All right, let's jump back to Deuteronomy 22. Deuteronomy 22, verses 6 and 7, he talks about respect for animal life, and we have dominion over all these things, and all these things are here to serve us. But he's saying you're not to be abusive of the animals, and we know the difference in that. And by the way, killing a deer or a cow or something and eating it is not abuse. That's us using them. Abuse is, you know, sometimes you see these stories where somebody has 50 dogs in their house and they're all starving to death, and you know they have the mange and all that kind of stuff. That's an abusive type of thing. Or if somebody, you know, beats an animal, kicks an animal, you know, just abuses them, that's what it's condemning, not the use of animals for our good and for our benefit and service to us, if you will. 22 verse 8, what does he lay down there? What's the principle?
And our construction techniques are no longer up to standard?
Okay, so tell me about that.
Basically says when you build a house, you should make a parapet for your roof, which essentially would have been a wall around the outside edge of the roof, so that you will not bring blood gills on your house and then your falls from.
Okay, and we think about the reason this is there is because they would generally have stairs up to that flat rooftop, and they would go up, and he's saying, you know, somebody goes up there, that could be a danger for them at night, or if they're not paying attention, or if they're young and they're just, you know, not thinking about it. So you want to put in some type of safety measure there. Now, I would argue our safety measures have gone way overboard with OSHA. Okay, if you're an OSHA fan, I'm sorry, but I think there's some things that are probably overboard. But the principle is you have respect for human life and do what you can to help protect it in a reasonable manner, a reasonable way. So, you know, it's interesting how Deuteronomy kind of covers a broad swath of things in society, how it functions, how it's going to function well, and you respect for and care about other people. All right, I'm sorry, but we just have to press here. When it talks a little bit later here about the tassels, if you go back to Numbers 15, the tassels on the garment were to remind them about the covenant that they had with God. That was his point and purpose. And overall, part of what this is really all drawing on is that God's people are to maintain a distinct way of life separate from the world around them, so as not to mimic them in look or behavior. All right, verses 13 down through 30. I'm not going to take time to read this, but question number 2 is briefly list the cases addressed here and discuss whether or not these would be good today. So, a man marries a woman and it says that he questions her virginity. What happens?
Bring the bed sheets out and try to prove yea or nay what
Okay.
wasn't.
Okay.
If she was, then he's at fault. If she wasn't, then she's being put to death. So basically, it's just going back to the point of keeping yourself pure.
Okay. So, if the charges are false, because when they, back in Bible times, when they were betrothed, that was a legal contract. And they treated it just like marriage. That's when you get into the New Testament about Joseph and Mary, and Joseph was minded to put her away, okay, because they were betrothed to each other. For them, it was a much stronger contract than our social custom of being engaged. You know, people break engagements, there's no consequence today. Back then, there was a consequence to it. And so it's saying in that time, you know, he's charged her with being unfaithful. And if it's false, the man is fine and he cannot divorce her. But if it's true, the woman is stoned. And it does promote purity on the part of the woman and her family to protect her before she enters into that marriage. In verse 22, what does it say? What's it dealing with specifically? Yeah, adultery. Just straight up, a man lies with a woman who has a husband. Adultery. This is what David was guilty of. If you remember, when God told him he was forgiven, he said, your life will not be required. He pardoned him from death, but those other consequences will still there. But God gave an exemption to David on this particular thing. But it says that adultery is punishable by death. Then verses 23 to 27, what's in there? Okay. If you have sexual relations with someone who is betrothed, that's punishable by death. So a man and a woman are to be stoned. If it's in a city, a town, a village, the woman did not cry. The man is stoned if it's in the countryside. And this is dealing really with issues of rape. And saying here's how you deal with those things. If the woman did not cry, of course, if she cried, it's assumed that people knew about it, that she was not there voluntarily, and so there's the man being punished for that. Verses 28 and 29, talking about relations with an unmarried woman, non-betrothed. He's to pay a fine, he has to marry her, and he cannot divorce her. So that would tend to make a man not force himself on a woman who was not betrothed. Because then he would have to marry her and could never put her away. And then there's the dealing with incest. In verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor uncover his father's bed. In the Old Testament, when it talks about uncovering a father's bed or uncovering a father's nakedness, that's euphemisms, talking about sexual activity. So when you go back to Noah and Ham, and it says Ham saw his father's nakedness, that's probably a euphemism for Ham just didn't see his father without clothing. There's something else that happened. But the Bible just doesn't get explicit about it. And that's why Noah goes completely, I don't want to say berserk, but he, Ham, you're cursed for what has just happened, for what you've done. And then he talked to his brothers about it. And it's a humiliation for his father. But uncovering father's bed or uncovering nakedness, you go back to Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, it talks about uncovering nakedness. It's not just saying somebody doesn't have clothes on. It's talking about relations that are taking place. All right. Anything down through 22? I know we're moving quickly.
Do you have a short answer on how you answered whether the copies would be good today? That wasn't really.
I do have a short answer. Yes. Yes. If there used to be laws against adultery in this country, and they were pretty strong laws and laws of all kinds that came into play that were really biblically based. But as our culture has become more corrupt, further away from God, they've removed those laws. And really, mostly, it's courts that have said, well, we don't think that's a good law anymore. So we're just not going to do anything about it.
They had to remove the laws in order to promote.
Keep politicians in office?
In order, yeah, in order to promote homosexuality, and that was
Yeah.
in game farm.
Well, and so many powerful people were caught up in adultery, divorce, all those things, entering into second, third, fourth, fifth marriages. They had to wipe those things off just so they could continue on without legal ramification. And then it opened the door exactly for homosexual and now everything under the sun. All right. So chapter 23, verses 1 to 8, deal with people who are excluded from the assembly of the Lord. The assembly of the Lord is talking about specifically worship services. And one of the things that helps us to understand that is Ruth was a Moabitess and she was accepted into Israel. And she's even included in the lineage of Christ. But it said here that the Moabites were to be excluded from the assembly of the Lord forever. So it's not that they were excluded from proselytizing, if you will, coming into Israel, accepting their ways, their beliefs and things like that. It's more of those religious assemblies. Verses 9 through 14, it deals with camp hygiene, different things about that. And understand what it's simply pointing to, as with so many other regulations, is there is holy and there is unholy. There is clean, there is unclean. That's the basis behind these rules and these regulations. In verses 15 to 25, you have a lot of laws that vary from the slaves being provided, these foreign slaves being provided sanctuary. I want to read verses 17 and 18 though. Deuteronomy 23, 17 and 18. Who will grab that for us? Go ahead.
There shall be no ritual harlot of the daughters of Israel, or perverted one of the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God, or any vow of offering. For both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God.
Okay. So basically what he's saying is, one, this type of thing would be associated a lot with idolatry because they had their cultic, ritualistic prostitutes, both male and female. But what he's saying is you can't have these ill-gotten gains and come and make an offering before the Lord out of those. You can't make your money unethically and then give it to God and think God's okay with it, because He's not. Now, we're going to wrap it up there. Okay, good. 5 minutes, perfect, thank you. All right, what did they do about interest on loans? What were they allowed to do and not to do?
You're alien or not. You're
Right, and Jews today still practice this, and they look out for each other in business. If you've ever known like a group, not just one guy, but if you see a community where they're operating, they help each other out in business. They look out for one another, and this is a part of it, that they don't charge interest to each other's. Question number 4 I'd ask, note some vows we might take to the Lord, because He tells us here, keep your vows. What are some we might take, we take or might take? Wedding vows. Those are before the Lord. Always before the Lord. That's who we're making that covenant with. He has a part to play in that covenant. Any others?
We may vow to tell the truth in a certain situation where we're called on to do so.
Right. Yeah, it could be legal documents, legal proceedings, things like that. Anything else?
baptism is like a vow.
It is. When we can...
You might not say, I vow to the Lord, but we're effectively when we confess and committing to do that vow, promising, pledging.
100%. 100%. Yes, it is a vow that we are taking to the Lord. We're pledging allegiance to Him when we confess and repent and we're baptized we definitely are taking that Pledge of Allegiance. All right, verses 24 and 25. 24 and 25. Let's read those and make a comment, and then we'll close it out there. Deuteronomy 23, 24, and 25.
If you go to your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you wish, but you shall not put any in your bag. If you go to your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand. You shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain.
Okay, so essentially what is this?
Welfare.
It's a provision. People traveling through, they're walking through, they can get something that they can eat that will nourish them and carry them on. But you can't go over your neighbor's place, with a big container and just start harvesting their crops. You can get enough to eat, it's okay. This is what the disciples were doing when they're walking through the grain fields, and they're getting it and they're eating along the way, and the Pharisees go bonkers about the fact that they hadn't washed their hands, but that's what they were doing at the time. It was perfectly acceptable in Israel to do that, because it's not that big a deal, right? You just eat enough, get some food while you're walking along, and that's good, and keep going. Any other thoughts there?
Well, the opposite also, on the other side of the coin, you're supposed to let people do that.
Right. Yeah, you let them do that. And again, going back to the story of Ruth, Boaz particularly left stuff there, but whatever was left, and it talks about, if you leave a sheaf in the field, don't go back and get it. Leave it there for the poor to take it. And it's just reinforcing that principle, love your neighbor, because there are people who are poor who need these things. And if you've got enough to harvest a field and you forget one out there, it's okay. You're going to be all right. All right, Lord willing, next week let's pick up in Deuteronomy 24, go on through the next lesson, which I believe takes us through 27. So it'll be 4 chapters. We'll be moving rather quickly again, hopefully. But thank y'all.